This is what David Watson means to connote by the word technology. Okay? Whereas previously limited, diversified, local techniques bore the stamp of the culture, right? Think of the platforms at Celilo Falls, the fishing platforms at Celilo Falls. Limited, diversified, local techniques bore the stamp of the culture and the individuals from which they emerged. Now, technology changes all local and individual conditions to its own image. All right? It is gradually creating a single vast homogeneous technological civilization which smashes down every Chinese wall and generates a dispossessed, right? We're talking here about global culture. Global culture under the influence of the technological mega machine and 21st century capitalism. All right? People have lost their traditional techniques and become dependent upon an apparatus. Mass production produces masses. Technology is not a tool, but an environment. That's what he means by technology, by this specific term that he's using. Not a tool, but an environment. It is that too, right? I mean, other people can use this term to describe, all kinds of other things. But when he uses it, this is what he wants to talk about. A totality of means, right? Not a tool, but an environment. Right? He says it's ridiculous to try to draw one linear line from the chimpanzee who first used a stick to pry open a colony of ants or something, all the way to the human who's using a nuclear weapon now today, right? Right? I mean, the first is an example of just technique, right? And the second is a totalizing system, right? A totality of means, enclosing us in its automatism of need and exponential development. The direction of governments flows from the technical conditions to people, not the other way around. What we find is not a tool waiting passively to be used, but a technical ensemble that demands routinized behavior. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I would be inclined to say that this is an example of technology demanding routinized behavior from stockholders in the Winans Brothers canneries and the Sufert Brothers canneries and all the other little corporations, big, small corporations that demanded fully instrumentalizing salmon populations and harvesting as many salmon as possible. Right? 72,000 pounds in one day is what one of these fish wheels harvested. Right? The direction of governance flows from the technical conditions to the people. Right? At Celilo Falls, the direction of governance flowed from the people to the technique, right? The people knew because their elders could tell when a particular salmon run, every salmon that swam past Celilo Falls, the elders knew where that salmon was going, and they could identify different types, different salmon runs, hundreds of different subspecies, right? And their management was on the ground, and when the fisheries manager said it was time to shut down the fishery because the salmon that happened to be passing that evening or that day were having a hard time, right? And you needed to let them go, then everyone would shut down, right? Here, though, with the fish wheel, the demand is to harvest as many salmon as possible in order to maximize profit, right? Technique at Celilo Falls, technology, a totality of means enclosing us in its automatism of need and exponential development, and changing our characters, changing us on the inside, demanding conformity, right, to that totality of means. All right, so I'll correct that. I'm saying now that fish wheels are another example of technology. In fact, that's the difference between the West's approach to the salmon resource and the indigenous approach to the salmon resource. All right, and there's a picture from overhead. This is I-84 heading right. The river flows this way. You go up I-84 heading east in that direction. And if you stop right about here, and this must be an old photo. I don't know how old this is, but I suspect this is probably taken in the 60s because a lot of things have changed since then on both sides of the river. But right down here is where that one in lieu, I'm pretty sure this is where it would be. The in lieu site that is being used. If you take that philosophy field trip, then be sure to stop right about in there and just look down. Don't go down in there, but just be aware be a witness. Be a witness to what's still happening, right? 15,000 years of culture, right? Still with a lifeline on the river, still connecting, right? Still connecting back to time immemorial, right? Still harvesting the resource, right? Right there in that ramshackle collection of RVs and just squalid conditions. These people, surrounded on all sides. Looking out onto the Dalles Dam right here, there's a giant American flag, right? Not that that's such a bad thing, but if you're trying to maintain your traditional fishing livelihood and you're boxed into this tiny little corner of the river, it's probably not so, it might be a little demoralizing to look across and see that. In any event. All right. Technology. So, technology is not neutral. This is where he makes that point about how the popular story about technology says that technology is neutral. Technology is just a tool, right? The same way that first human who used a tool to pry, or that primate who used a tool to pry open a tree to get at the ants or something, right? That was just a tool, right? To improve our lives. And all technology is a tool to improve our lives. He says that you're off in the wrong direction if you think of technology that way. Right? The myth of a technology separate from its use assumes that means are simply instruments and not that universe of means. Right? It fails to understand that such ubiquitous means themselves eventually become ends. And this is really kind of terrifying. Okay? And this is, if you don't understand what he means, then just let this echo and keep echoing on the bus ride home or the bike ride home until you understand. Such ubiquitous means themselves eventually become ends, requiring their inevitable characterological internalization in human beings. In other words, human beings must obey and thus become the slaves of their mechanical slaves. As Lewis Mumford warned in The Pentagon of Power, it is the system itself that once set up gives orders. This self-inflicted impotence is the other side of total control. Who has the power? Who's the man? Who's the man? Where's the office of the man? Name. What street is it on? Wall Street? Okay. So in the office of the man, what do you suppose the man is using to make his decisions?
Computer programs.
Control.
Computer programs. Yeah. And that's, this is literally, this is what David Watson is pointing out. He's not speaking metaphorically here. Humankind does not have a relationship of autonomy with respect to technology. Humankind is caught up in a maelstrom of this technological mega machine, and literally nobody in society at any level of the hierarchy can be said to be in rational control of the technological mega machine. And the point of the man on Wall Street, it's just, that's what he's talking about. These powerful people are not making decisions out of their own autonomous free will. They're making decisions following a computer program. It's kind of terrifying, right? But the most terrifying thing of all is this part about requiring their inevitable character. What is he saying there? He's saying we are forced to adopt inside the character that the technological mega machine foists upon us. And we don't have even control over our own selves now. We're phony to the core. Yes?
Isn't the man the one who created the computer program? Because the computer program has to have human theory behind it.
Not necessarily.
The computer program can't create itself.
The Baconian technocrat.
So
these are important questions, though.
Create itself.
Exactly. Well, some anthropos, right? Some anthropos has a vision of this, that designed the computer, right, to continue harvesting wealth and siphoning it up to the man in the office on Wall Street, right? But we have to have a public debate, which we're not able to have for a number of different reasons in our society. But we have to have a public debate about what is this anthropos that we ought to be designing our society around. It seems that many in our culture have accepted the idea that anthropos is some inveterately, inherently selfish, greedy, narcissistic, competitive, violent animal, right? Just drenched in testosterone, and then that's just how humankind is. And anthropos is consumer, right? Anthropos is not citizen. And part of what David Watson is saying, and most of the other thinkers we've read are saying, I think, is that we need to encourage the cooperative anthropos, and it's not hard to do. It's all, because that's the natural anthropos. The natural, and if we can use that term, I know I steer you guys away from using that word natural, but obviously we get a lot of work done. If it's true that there is a self-understanding of anthropos dominant throughout the 100,000 years, right? That cultural anthropos has been around. Then it's only in the last 1,000 years or so that this consumer-oriented, competitive, greedy, violent white man anthropos has stolen the stage of world history, right? Is that fair to say? I don't know. I can say things like this because I'm a white man too. But right? This dominant white man has only come along in the last 1,000 years and stolen the stage of history, and is now busily rewriting in the last 100 years or so, reinscribing everything that went before as though it's always been like that, right? That's Bookchin's point, right? The powerful elite always have a vested interest in attributing an economic order, which is an entirely human invention, to some supposed state of nature, right? And part of what Watson is saying, part of what Bookchin's saying, part of what our ecofeminists are saying is that that's just a false reading of history. That in fact the cooperative, altruistic anthropos is the dominant figure in human history, right? And this minority figure of the greedy, narcissistic Donald Trump kind of anthropos, this USA, and everyone's in it for himself, and it's a war of all against all, and that's just how nature is. That's all a perversion and a twisting and warping of what humans are really about, right? In any event, for what it's worth. So anyway, even those supposedly directing the machines are themselves its creatures, each one. And so we're trapped, right? We're trapped in the prison of this 20th and 21st century scientistic, reductionistic version of anthropos, right? And that's what we need to overthrow, right? I mean, that's a big part of what we need to overthrow. And recognize that the selfhood that the technological mega machine directs us to adopt is phony. It's not really what we're all about. One participates in mass society the way a computer relay participates in a machine. The option remains to malfunction, but even rebellion tends to be shaped by the forms technology imposes. This is the individuality toward which computerized life drifts. A narcissistic, privatized, passive-aggressive, alienated rage, engaging in sadomasochistic play far removed from the consequences of its unfocused, destructive impulses. And everything becomes instrumentalized, of course, even our feelings, language, of course, and we just assume that's what everyone else is doing too, right? We instrumentalize our feelings and put on a big, show of emotion when really we're just kind of faking it, but we know that produces effects in people, right? Men throw around their anger, right? And then women throw around their crying and tears and all that. It's all just manipulation, right? This is obviously very cynical reading, but this is kind of what he's getting at, right? How so many aspects of our life have been reduced to instruments in this blind technological machine that really doesn't have any answer to deeper questions about meaning and value, right? Nothing is valuable and everything is meaningless, right? Everything is valueless, everything is meaningless in the technological mega machine. And of course, human life ultimately is disposable. The techno-fascist style, prevalent today with its fascination with machines, force, and speed, works well in the media until there is no separation between brutalization by power and an internal, self-managed brutalization. So those of you who have done some research into political science might have encountered the name of a very well-known, highly regarded 20th century political scientist named Sheldon Wolin. And Sheldon Wolin is the guy that describes our political system, our political and economic system in the United States as a form of inverted totalitarianism. And the insights that David Watson offers are certainly consistent with that thesis about our political economic system, because this basically an inverted totalitarian society is the society in which conformity is enforced at the ground level rather than by some sort of patriarch, right, like a Mussolini or a Hitler, right? So an inverted totalitarian system is an authoritarian system without the authoritarian figure at the top, and instead the authoritarian figure is internalized by all the people at the bottom of the pyramid, right? So the pyramid is still brutalizing everybody, running roughshod over the earth like it did in the Roman times, right? Still stripping the earth of all its resources, trapping all the bears, and subjecting some poor hapless human being who happened to be convicted of shoplifting or what have you to being attacked by some starved bear that you stole and kidnapped. Anyway, enough of that, right? But that's what's still going on today, right? Technological structures are revolutionizing human response by forcing life to conform to the parameters of machines. This quantification will reshape thought. It will become true by force, as the railroad became more true than the buffalo and the sheep enclosure, more true than the commons. All right? And what this means is that certain modes of thinking will simply atrophy and disappear, like rare, specialized species of birds. Later generations will never miss what they never had. The domain of language and meaning will be the domain of the screen. And one day, there will be no more dissatisfied thinkers, right? There'll only be satisfied cogs in the machine, because the capacity to step outside of one's own subjection will have been lost, right? And the mind itself will have become literally nothing more than a tool to get its user from point A to point B. And the idea of questioning that journey, the idea of questioning, thinking about point A and thinking about point B, thinking about the human condition, thinking about thinking, no longer possible, right? Just closed off completely. As truth itself becomes privatized into becoming an instrument for the reinforcement of power and wealth, right? Truth itself becomes privatized, so it becomes literally impossible to speak a truth that is not consistent and not supportive of the technological mega machine and all of the power relationships that are embedded within it. That's terrifying, isn't it? Yes?
Is he saying we need to abandon it or just approach it differently? Because it seems like if you look at something like what the NSA has been doing for the last 15 years in this country, they're only really able to do that because of technology. But if you went back to, let's say, 1776 or whatever, even if we had that technology at the time, it seems like if people were trying to use it, they would have been like, no, we just became a new country, we have this constitution that says no. So is it more of an issue of how we approach it, or?
It seems to me many of the thinkers that we've been studying have made a similar point about technologies that, and it's a larger point that I've tried to make throughout the term, and that point is that that Western culture's technological capacities have developed much more rapidly than our ethical capacities, our capacities to understand. And so, even while science has afforded humankind the opportunity to fully instrumentalize everything, science has also showed us that doing so is catastrophic, right? That there is an order, there is an ecological order which, if violated to too far, right? If we violate that ecological order, at some point, right, we've gone too far, and the consequences are catastrophic. And so the response that moral philosophers are urging our culture to is to slow down technology and speed up our moral evolution and allow and that means we have to withdraw, right? Look, Rachel Carson came on the scene in 1962 and wrote about the dangers, the physical health concerns posed by DDT and other pesticides, right? And within 2 years, both Congress and the White House had passed, in Congress case legislation, the White House new regulations outlawing, prohibiting the use of DDT. And but that involved withdrawing technology, right? And that's what Rachel Carson was saying in her book. She's saying we have this awesome power, right? Silent Spring is this imaginary future in which spring comes, but the songbirds don't come. It's silent, right? Silent spring. And that's because humans have used their awesome powers of technology to eliminate all pestilence, right? Humans have eliminated all pestilence, right? With their chemicals, with their DDTs and stuff, right? But the consequence of that is no more songbirds, right? The bird population has been wiped out, so we have silent spring. And what Rachel Carson is saying is that our normative response to that situation, right? The normative judgment that comes from understanding that situation is that we are morally obligated to withdraw our technology, to withdraw what we can do. We can, obviously we can't eliminate pestilence, that's a fantasy, right? But we have the power to do certain things that that ecological thinkers are urging us not to do, right? Like we have the power to fully instrumentalize Snake River water resources. Ecological thinkers are urging us that that's morally wrong to fully instrumental. So in every case, the larger problem that we face is the withdrawal of technology, and that's why David Watson's argument is so important at this stage of our journey, I think, because he's saying, look, if that's right, that's what we need to do. That's what Rachel Carson was saying 50, 60 years ago. That's what Uncle Aldo was saying 70, 80 years ago. Their larger message was that we need to withdraw our technological domination of Earth's systems, right? That is our fundamental moral obligation. And yet, if we don't have an autonomous relationship with technology, then how do we go about doing that? How do we go about, right, making decisions? Well, we just do it, man. We know these damn concrete extrusions in the Snake River don't make any sense at all. Technological, well, you guys need to. I'm sure the Snake River Dam defenders are going to just knock it out of the park, and you guys are going to have these really. So watch out, environmental community. You guys are being set up to be taken to the woodshed, I think. But we've got an A team over here with these dam defenders. Thanks to Corey, right? Corey's going to assemble a really strong lineup. So watch out, environmental community. And all of you who think that we should remove the 4 lower snake dams, because you are going to be challenged like you've never been challenged before a week from this Thursday.
I expect a fight.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun. And hopefully I'm giving you guys enough time. But I'll break it down. So I'll have a description of exactly what we have. About 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I'll have a careful time. I'll have it broken down. I don't want to have it too specific because I want to leave room, for you guys. Right? We don't know what's going to happen during that 2 hours and 15 minutes. So. But I will have it, we'll have it fairly tightly choreographed, so you guys will know what's expected and who's going to speak at what time, right? In any event, and we'll deal with that on Thursday. So let's see, what else can we do? All right, so this is really kind of terrifying, isn't it? I don't know, maybe it isn't. Who knows? If you've already been, if you're just convinced that the whole point of your education, if you've already fully instrumentalized your education, right? Education is just an instrument for you to achieve. You just need a piece of paper, and then you can get that job that you really want and get started on your career, right? And then you can go about accumulating those material possessions that you think are important to have a significant life, right? And then all this talk about the moral status of an ecological whole is ridiculous and meaningless. And furthermore, they're just going to do what they're doing, right? You know, they're just going to continue extracting resources and continue making as much profit off of them as possible, and there's very little that an individual can do about that. But anyway, all right, and technology is busily obliterating the natural world, as we know. I'm not sure how much of this page we need to go through. This is where he kind of gets into genetic engineering a little bit. And then his solution at the end is what he gives us this phrase, epistemological Luddism. All right, and that's the last couple pages of his essay he devotes to give us some kind of, well, what should we do now? Professor Watson, you've given us this devastating analysis of the dire situation we find ourselves in. So how do we respond? What should we do to try to resist? How do we resist? How do we resist the technological mega machine? That sounds like a horribly left-wing question, doesn't it? I remind you, though, that Christopher Stone's civil libertarianism, Christopher Stone's guardianship system is not a left-wing solution at all. We've got to approach all these problems with fresh minds and stop falling into the pit of letting some definition, dictate. Anyway, there are a whole bunch of solutions we need to begin implementing as soon as possible, and perhaps some of those solutions are coming from a left-wing point of view, but I'm always quick to remind people that, perhaps they're not either. I mean, left-wing usually means some big, some government program is going to intervene in the marketplace. What Christopher Stone is proposing isn't really a big government intervention. It's just a, right? A basic reformation of our legal and political system. Anyway, so he points out, I don't know how accurate all this is. I thought it was interesting, his comment on the gift economy, potlatch ceremony. Did you guys read about that? These potlatch ceremonies. That was kind of an indigenous Northwest cultures. From what I can tell, this was their way of perhaps culturally, perhaps their customs were such that the man who gave away the most belongings was the most powerful. And so, right? So their customs discouraged people from hoarding wealth, which is a stark contrast, right, to our. They live very comfortable. They're very, very comfortable. All the native people of the Pacific Northwest were very wealthy. Not in our sense, right? They didn't have big fancy houses and jewelry and stuff like that, but they just had very comfortable lives. They're very, very comfortable because of the amazing sources of food that were all around them. But they had a strong disincentive toward acquiring wealth because you earned greater respect in your community if you gave your things away, right? So, in any event, this perhaps was a institutional resistance to, if there is something like a natural tendency toward extreme capitalism like what we have now and allowing economic relations to dominate our society, right? That's where we are now, right? Economic relationships are the most important relationships in our society, right? And that's why humans are encouraged, landowners are encouraged to instrumentalize everything they have on their land, right? But we could envision another society. And so Watson is pointing out that the ancient Greeks might offer us a counterexample, and some Native American cultures might also offer us a counterexample. And we have the Luddites in the 19th century. These were activists who destroyed factory equipment, basically. The Luddites destroyed factory equipment. They were 19th century textile artisans, right? People who made clothes and blankets and really beautiful handcrafted goods. And their livelihoods were threatened by factories, right? And so they would go into these factories and destroy destroy the spinning frames and power looms. Anyway, so they got this name Luddite. And since then, the name Luddite is applied to people who are opposed to technology in general, although that's probably unfair. The Luddites weren't really opposed. I mean, these people who destroyed, right? They weren't really opposed to technology per se. They were in favor of a more sensible policy about technology that did not result in the loss of their livelihoods. All right. So he uses this term epistemological Luddism. As far as I can tell, it's a system of adaptive management, okay? Some of you might have encountered this term before. Adaptive management. Begin dismantling problematic technological structures and refuse to repair. So just let it all break down and stop repairing it. Stop repairing the freeways. To hell with the damn freeways. Just let them fall apart. If people don't want to drive in potholes anymore, then why don't they start promoting trains and things like that? It's the most inefficient way, and we don't do this with anything else. Imagine if that was our way of moving non-human objects around. Well, let's put each individual non-human object in its own separate little metal box, right? Make it all shiny, pretty colors and stuff. Put some wheels on it. Put an internal combustion engine in it. And every little object we want to send somewhere in the world, we're going to transport it that way, right? That's how we move humans. That doesn't make any sense at all. It's stupid. Incredibly, incredibly stupid. And so let that system fall apart. And by the way, that system was all strategically put in place by the oil companies and the car companies. You can still see in some parts of Portland the old rail systems that in the 30s and 40s were bought up and let go extinct by anyway. It was all deliberate to convert us to this car economy, right? And now we need to I'm just using that as an example. Let the car economy collapse. Just let it all fall apart, all right? Extreme solution, perhaps. Unreasonable, perhaps. Unworkable, perhaps. Americans are too whatever, perhaps. They'll never go for it, perhaps. But this is a class in moral philosophy, and that's the moral philosophical solution that our thinker today has come up with. And we don't have answers in this class, right? You guys need to go get the answers. We're just trying to explore moral truth claims. Yes?
So that makes me think, if in the past, when we discovered that fossil fuels were such a powerful source of energy, but we also understood at the time the effects that it would have, would we still have attempted to use it?
Some people want to say, yes, we would. What happened here? I don't know. Some people would say, yes, we would, right?
What was it? Lost found out that like greenhouse gases.
Well, I made that claim about the Snake River dams and about the Dallas Dam. But yeah, Henry Ford's pernicious invention. If we had known, what it led to, would we have promoted this car? And what does that say, though, about? If the answer to your question, Ben, is no, we would not have done this. We would have